With section 5.3, we've truly arrived at the heart of the course. And ironically, even though this is going to be one of the more difficult areas, or at least an area where there's a good deal of work and time involved in trying to go through the homework and the derivations, even though that's the case, conceptually there's not as much to say. So we'll have a little bit of preamble here in ironing out some of the concepts and the things that specific things that are actually said that are new in outlining strategies and sub-goals and that sort of thing in 5.3. The majority of the time, though, should be spent on working through the homework, working through the examples, so we'll be brief here. Now, in constructing derivations, it makes sense to try and get to your goal by identifying a number of sub-goals that are able to be arrived at. So in a fairly straightforward fashion. So, and oftentimes this means, recognizing, okay, I want to derive a particular thing that's similar to a certain premise, or maybe it's similar to the consequent in a material conditional in a premise. And so then that tells me, okay, well, I have to kind of work backwards from there and say, well, I need to get the antecedent. To get the antecedent, I have to get this, to get that, to get this, to get that, and so on, and kind of trying to work your way backwards through the maze to see if you can find a path forward from the premises to the conclusion. And so basically what you're going to do is try and arrive at the different sub-goals, and you identify those sub-goals oftentimes by working backwards. So that's what I would suggest, at least. Now, they have a set of strategies here, and some of these are relatively obvious. So if the sentence can be arrived at by reiteration, then use that. Well, okay, the simplest is best is essentially the what's at the core of all these pieces of strategy. Similarly, if you can get there without using a subderivation, then that's probably a good idea. Only use a subderivation if you have to, in other words, and that's kind of obvious. So dealing with an extra assumption and then trying to discharge it introduces additional complexity. And so if you can do without that complexity, then it's probably better to do so. And on the mathematical side, instead of just saying that, well, it's easier, it's more expedient, that sort of thing, as far as mathematicians are concerned, this is tantamount to saying that elegance is what you really should be aiming for. In other words, simpler is better because it is more elegant. It is a more beautiful derivation in that way. And I mean that in a real sense, in the same way that mathematicians really do find theorems and particular proofs beautiful. There is something aesthetically attractive about an idea that has been thought through in a very, very clever fashion that gives us a short, neat, concise, hopefully maybe easy to follow proof for some significant problem. That's a really great thing in mathematics if you can do that. And similarly here, for logic, if you can find a very quick and clever way of getting at the conclusion, then so much the better. And subderivations are a little messier, so if you can avoid that, probably a good idea to do so. If you can't avoid it, then obviously use a subderivation. That's fine. Not a big deal. So when using a negation rule, try and use an already accessible negation. In other words, you may not want to introduce these things unnecessarily. And so this is precisely the same sort of, advice towards parsimony, basically. And by invoking the idea of parsimony and being parsimonious, I'm really talking about something like Occam's razor in trying to get there in the simplest fashion possible. And so if you recall, if you've had this particular portion of philosophical history or are familiar with Occam's razor was something that he brought up to shave Plato's beard. In other words, to rid philosophical argumentation of unnecessary assumptions. And those unnecessary assumptions might have come, especially with Plato, in the form of the assumption of another world that is more real than this world, that is populated with forms and so on and so forth. That might seem to be just an overly complex and needlessly complex, adding details that are not desirable, not needed, and so on and so We're not inclined to like that kind of argument in the same way today. Now, this isn't to say that Plato was just making things up, and it took Occam some 1600 years later to notice that he was creating things unnecessarily. I think we can give Plato more credit than that, but at the same time, that was the gist of what Occam had in mind in trying to do this, and it just so happens that this is a really important rule when it comes to the way that we think, the way that we do argumentation, the way that we do mathematics, and the way that we do logic, and then also the way that we do science more generally. And so scientific thinking is going to correspond to just this sort of attitude or penchant for parsimony. So trying not to introduce unnecessary complexity. That's basically what you have there. So defining subgoals, this in its most obvious form is just breaking the problem into pieces. As we read in the Tao Te Ching, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. The master makes big problems, can accomplish big things by first making them small. And so that's easy enough, right? I mean, if you have a really big thing, then you take little bites. And by defining those little bites, you make the entire problem tractable and make it possible for you to actually work your way through it. And that's ultimately, what's recommended here. So if you have something that looks hideously complicated, then try and define individual subgoals that all taken together will end up getting you there. Now, again, in terms of philosophical history, this has an analog specifically with respect to the notion of progress and the sort of thing that we get from Pascal in particular, and the idea that progress is something that it's not just an individual that's going to be doing it, who can master all of the possible knowledge, because especially by Pascal's time, that was no longer really feasible in the way that it was 500 years prior, and it's certainly not feasible today. I mean, even trying to learn everything that there is to know about a small niche of a subdiscipline oftentimes is intractable. So anyway, this whole approach of breaking something into logical pieces and then breaking it into pieces that can be accomplished objectively with logic that you and I can both look at, hopefully, and recognize that it is valid, that it is right, that is strongly analogous to our notion of scientific progress. So that's kind of an interesting thing to realize, and one might even go as far as saying that the structure, the logical structure of the modern computer is analogous to the way that we approach scientific progress, which is kind of an interesting thing if you think about it. The way that we do modular programming, for those of you who are familiar with more of the nitty-gritty of programming, the way that we approach modular programming and the construction of progressively higher level languages allows us to do greater things by more or less standing on the shoulders of giants. It's essentially the same kind of intellectual approach to building programs in computer science as we build theories and knowledge in science, so the story goes. So anyway, the way that this works with respect to logical derivations is that you need to identify, whenever possible, a number of subgoals that are achievable. And insofar as you can lay these subgoals out in order, and I've suggested working backwards. I think that oftentimes is easier. So you know where you want to end up. You start with your conclusion. You recognize what the last steps are going to be, hopefully, to be able to get there. And then you define subgoals beyond that bridge the gap between what's going on in the conclusion and what you have already in the premises. And I have a couple of an example here, so that when you're given those two premises and you're asked to derive L and D, then you've got two separate subgoals, obviously. You need to get L and you need to get D, so that you can then do conjunction introduction and put them together and get L and D. Well, how are you going to get L? Well, one obvious strategy suggests itself. When I have the second premise itself has a conjunction in it. I can break that into two pieces because those are two things that I know. So not in implies L is one of those. Well, not in is one of the premises. So I can then go through the material conditional and get to L. So now I've gotten half of it. So that's one of my subgoals that can be accomplished by doing that. Correspondingly, how do I derive D? Well, if I look at the other half of the conjunction in premise 2, D is equivalent to not in or A, then I see that I can get to D if I can get to not in or A. Well, I already have not in. By using disjunction introduction, I can get not in or A, and then I can cross the equivalence, the material biconditional, and get D. Now I have L and D. I sandwich them together by using conjunction introduction, and I'm done. So this slide basically says take your time with the homework. That the homework is an absolutely essential part of learning to do the derivations. There's no substitute for going through and practicing these things. And this is kind of an interesting thing with respect to academic learning, because what it suggests is that there are two different flavors of learning. You have the first flavor of just pure intellectual understanding, in the sense that I'm making an argument, like for instance what I just did, and describing how it is that that process works. And hopefully, if I was sufficiently clear and you were paying attention and able to follow it, then you were following along and nodding along and saying, yeah, that makes sense. If that makes sense to you, then you have intellectually understood what was said. Intellectual understanding gives you a certain kind of knowledge that perhaps you didn't have before. But that's not the same thing as what you get from practice with the derivations. So there's a certain element of skill building and habit that is not equivalent to intellectual understanding. And so this is the equivalent of training in athletics. And it's precisely the sort of thing that all of you guys are going to be familiar with, because you've all taken a number of mathematics courses, and mathematics generally works like this. Understanding something to begin with is obviously necessary, but it's not sufficient. It's the sort of thing that you have to do to be able to start out in mastering a particular mathematical concept and technology skill. But you have to go about actually developing that skill through practice. And that practice helps to cement the appropriate associations and helps to create habits that make it to where you don't have to think about every single aspect and every single decision of what it is that you're doing when you go through. And the upshot of this is that when you get to the test, you won't have to think about every single little thing and doubt every single little detail. You'll be able to get through the problems a lot more quickly. And so, the practical consequence there is very simple. You're going to be able to finish the test. You'll be able to do so more confidently, because habits tend to be created in the shadow of expertise, in the sense that you get it right, and you get it right enough that then you're able to get it right without thinking about it. Now, correspondingly, if you build the wrong habit, which more often happens in muscle memory and music and art and that sort of thing, or holding your pencil incorrectly or something of the kind, then you will have then learned to do it incorrectly without thinking about it, which is bad. And every musician and artist knows that it's harder to unlearn that than it is just to get it right to begin with. So you're much better off going through the training and being patient with it and getting it right to begin with. And so this is just an enjoinder here on this slide to say, be patient with the homework. We've reached the portion in the course where it makes a lot of sense to take your time with things, to go through all of the examples in the book, to go through all of the homework problems, and make sure that you've really gotten things down. If you can do everything in this section especially, then you'll have a really good handle, I think, on most of what I'm going to be expecting of you in the final exam with derivations. And that, of course, kind of is the capstone for the course. That's the culmination of a lot of what we've been working up to this semester, is being able to do these derivations and actually go through and evaluate arguments and craft proofs for conclusions. So, yes, take your time with the homework. And if you have any questions, of course, please feel free to contact me, to email me, or to set up an appointment, and we can talk.